There are a number of things that we find that people, when they get to the end of their life, they find themselves regretting. But I've never heard anybody say, I wish I had just spent a few more days at the office. If I could have closed a few more sales. Usually what they're regretting has to do with working too much at the expense of spending time with family and friends, or working too much and never really connecting with or building a relationship with God. They regret things like allowing their marriage to break down, or not spending enough time with children, or spending time with the wrong group of friends who led them in the wrong direction. Tonight, as we continue looking at material from our daily Bible readings, we'll be looking through the book of Ecclesiastes, which appears to be written late in Solomon's life. And it's about some of the things that he's gone after throughout his life to try to satisfy himself that didn't work. Looking back at all of the things that he's pursued to try to find satisfaction, to try to find fulfillment, and saying, that there's nothing there. Everything in this perspective, everything that he talks about here, he says this is vanity, or striving after the wind. The term vanity is used some 38 times in the book of Ecclesiastes, and that phrase, striving after the wind, or something very similar, is used also over and over again throughout this book as Solomon talks about these things that he's looked for ultimate fulfillment in, but it wasn't there. All of these worldly pursuits, it wasn't there. We start off in Ecclesiastes. We'll begin in chapter 1 and verse 1. Now, I'm going to do a fair amount of reading some longer sections in Ecclesiastes tonight as we talk about some of the things that he chased after, and we'll begin here at the very beginning of the book. He says, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What advantage does man have in all his work, which he does under the sun? A generation goes, a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Also the sun rises and the sun sets. Hastening to its place, it rises there again, blowing toward the south and turning towards the north. The wind continues swirling along, and on its circular courses the wind returns. All the rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, there they flow again. All things are wearisome. Man is not able to tell it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor is the ear filled with hearing. That which has been is that which will be, and that which has been done is that which will be done. So there's nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one might say, see this, it's new? Already it has existed for ages, which were before us. There's no remembrance of earlier things, and also of the later things which will occur. There will be for them no remembrance among those who will come later still. And so Solomon starts off here talking about there's nothing new. You see history repeating itself. You see man falling into the same traps, dealing with the same issues, chasing after the same things, looking for fulfillment in the same empty things, and generation after generation after generation. And the things that Solomon's going to bring up throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, where he says, this is vanity. Don't chase after this. This isn't going to bring satisfaction. This isn't going to bring fulfillment. It's the same things we see people, and sometimes we ourselves are chasing after today. Still looking for fulfillment. Still looking for what so many years ago Solomon wrote down and said it's not there. And we go chasing after, going, well, maybe for us it will be. Maybe for our generation, as if all the generations before haven't figured this out already and it hasn't already been written down, but it might be different for us. You see, that was back then. Well, we're more enlightened today. We're more sophisticated today. And all of these empty things are just as empty and just as vain as they were then. And we see that in the book of Ecclesiastes here. He starts off, there's nothing new under the sun. Same things that Solomon went after, we still struggle with. Picking up in chapter 1 and verse 12. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem. I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that's been done under heaven. It's a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. I've seen all the works which have been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after the wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said to myself, behold, I've magnified and increased wisdom more than all who were over Jerusalem before me. And my mind has observed a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. And I set my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. And I realize this also is striving after wind, because in much wisdom there's much grief. And increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. And so he talks about here pursuing wisdom, pursuing education, trying to, well, here's the be-all, end-all. If I can just learn enough, if I can just be smart enough, if I can just be wise enough, if I can know more than this person knows or than the other people know, then that's going to satisfy me. And he says, well, that's vanity. Making education, making all of this learning the be-all, end-all of existence. Now, we've got to keep this in balance. Because education is a good thing as long as it isn't put on a pedestal as the ultimate goal in life. Proverbs talks a great deal about the good of learning and obtaining wisdom. However, it doesn't speak about trying to find ultimate fulfillment in life and simply learning and learning and learning for the sake of learning. It doesn't speak of putting knowledge or wisdom in the place of God. It's where we go to look for ultimate fulfillment. What Solomon is talking about here is searching for fulfillment, just knowing enough. Looking for ultimate fulfillment through constant learning, but we have to ask ourselves, as we see in Proverbs, it is good to continue to learn and to grow in wisdom. What's the goal of that wisdom? What's the goal of that learning? What's it leading toward? In 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 7, Paul writes about those who are always learning and never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. You ever come across someone like that? They always know something new, but it never really seems to have any value or affect their life in a way that's meaningful. But they're learning. Here's something new that I've figured out, some new observation. Paul speaks about those, or it's written about those on Mars Hill in Acts chapter 17. They spent all their time learning new things. They weren't learning the truth. You know, it's possible to learn so much from books, to be so book smart, but to lack common sense, to not know how to actually use it for anything useful. And that's the kind of pursuit that Solomon is talking about here. If I can just learn enough. But what's the goal of that learning? Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and verse 1, knowledge makes arrogant, but love edifies. Love builds up. And speaking of this pursuit of knowledge and being built up by and looking for satisfaction and education and further knowledge, have you ever come across someone who was maybe a professor in college who was really proud of their title as Dr. such and such? But the more you got to sit into that class, the more you realize, well, they've got that doctorate, but it's not really doing much good because I have no idea what the benefit of this class is. What are we pursuing? Is education the be-all, end-all, or are we trying to learn and grow wise for the sake of learning and coming to know God? Learning is good, but it has to have purpose. The psalmist said in Psalm 119 in verse 11, and I know I quote this passage a lot, it's because I want it to stick. I want you to remember it. The psalmist said, your word I've treasured in my heart. There's learning. There's knowledge. But he doesn't stop there. It's got a purpose. That I may not sin against you. Learning is valuable when it has purpose. Are we learning so we can come to know God? Are we learning so that we can have something useful, so that we can have a skill, so that we can draw nearer to the Lord, so that we can do something with a purpose? Solomon was talking about learning as the be-all, end-all. And you know what he said of it? It's the same thing he said of a lot of other things there in Ecclesiastes. It's vanity, striving after wind. And that's where we pick up in Ecclesiastes chapter 2 with another of his pursuits. In chapter 2, beginning in verse 1, I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure. So enjoy yourself, and behold, it too is futility. I said of laughter, it's madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine while my mind was guiding me wisely, and how to take hold of folly until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under heaven for the few years of their lives. I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself, and I planted them in all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds of water for myself from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves, and I had homeborn slaves. I also possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. Also I collected for myself silver and gold, and the treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers, and the pleasures of men, many concubines. I became great and increased more than all those who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. All that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. Thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted. Behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun. So he talks about pleasure. There wasn't anything that I wanted that I said no to. Solomon said, if I wanted it, I went after it. He said, I'll test pleasure. Well, do we see that kind of thing today? Well, we see it in the slogans and advertising. Have it your way. And hasn't that become our way of life? Do whatever you want to. Do whatever makes you happy. God says, do what makes you holy. But that's become the mantra of our culture. And you look around at what's going on in our culture, we see hedonism, immorality. We see people chasing after pleasure and happiness as though it's the highest good. We see people chasing after whatever. Not saying no to any kind of pleasure. Not having the ability to want something and turn away from it. That's what our culture is after. Galatians chapter 5, Paul says the fruit of the Spirit is, and he gives a list that ends in self-control. The ability to want something and still say no. The ability to have a desire and recognize that's empty. To recognize that's wrong. To recognize that won't fulfill. To recognize that's not what God would want me to do. To have the desire for something and to still say no. But what we see here, Solomon is saying, I didn't turn away from anything that I saw and I wanted. He's gone to the greatest extent pursuing pleasure for ultimate satisfaction and fulfillment. And he comes to that same conclusion, that same thing that he says over and over. It was vanity, striving after wind. There was no profit in it. We pursue a lot of things for happiness. If I can just be entertained a little more. If I can just spend a little bit more time doing this activity. If I can just spend a little bit more money, I'll buy just this one more thing, and that will make me happy. It won't fulfill. Then we pick up with what he says is the next issue, the next thing that he says he pursues after, that he pursued for fulfillment. Chapter 2, verse 18. Thus I hated all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun, for I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he be a wise man or a fool? Yet he will have control over all the fruit of my labor for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun. This too is vanity. Therefore I completely despaired of all the fruit of my labor which I had labored under the sun. When there is a man who has labored with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and he gives his legacy to the one who has not labored with them. This too is vanity and great evil. For what does a man get in all his labor and his striving with which he labors under the sun? because all his days his task is painful and grievous. Even at night his mind does not rest. This too is vanity. He picks up this same idea in chapter 4. Beginning in verse 4, he says, I've seen that every labor and every skill which is done is the result of rivalry between a man and his neighbor. This too is vanity and striving after the wind. The fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. One hand full of rest is better than two fists full of labor and striving after wind. Then I looked again at vanity under the sun, and there was a certain man without a dependent, having neither a son nor a brother. Yet there was no end to all his labor. Indeed, his eyes were not satisfied with riches, and he never asked, and for whom am I laboring and depriving myself of pleasure? This too is vanity and a grievous task. Chapter 5 and verse 10, he says, he who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves abundance with its income. This too is vanity. We see him talking in a number of occasions through this book about pursuing after, if I can just work a little bit harder, if I can just earn a little more, if I can just accomplish the next thing. You know, because we always have this idea, if I could just accomplish this. You ever had that idea? If I could just get to this point in my life, if I could just make this much money, if I could just accomplish this goal, if I could just achieve this particular thing, well, then I'll be happy. What happens when you get there? There's always something else, something bigger, something more out there that's what Solomon here is talking about. Now, again, there's got to be balance, because working and earning is good, but not when it consumes you. Not when it becomes the be-all, end-all. There's a need for balance because, well, you know, as we've seen over in Proverbs, chapter 24, you see the necessity of working and earning and being productive. In Proverbs 24, beginning in verse 30, he says, I passed by the field of the sluggard, by the vineyard of the man lacking sense. Behold, it was completely overgrown with thistles. Its surface was covered with nettles. Its stone wall was broken down. I saw and I reflected upon it, and I looked and received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to the rest. Your poverty will come upon you as a robber, and your want like an armed man. There's got to be a balance here. Working and earning is good, but not when it consumes you, not when it becomes the motivation for all of life. And Solomon talks about here in Ecclesiastes, it's vanity when it consumes us like that. He says, because you can't take it with you in death. It's going to be left to someone else. It's what Jesus was talking about there when he tells the parable in Luke chapter 12 to someone who was asking him, tell my brother to split the inheritance with me, in Luke chapter 12, beginning in verse 16. Tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me, this man was saying. Jesus told them a parable, Luke 12 and verse 16. The land of a rich man was very productive. He began reasoning to himself, saying, what shall I do since I have no place to store my crops? He said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I'll store my grain with my goods. And I'll say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your soul is required of you, and now who will own what you've prepared? So is the man who stores up treasure for himself and not toward God. Solomon here is saying, if that's what consumes you, if it's all about earning and gaining and laboring and just accomplishing more, you can't take it with you. And that's vanity, he says. Vanity because as much laboring and earning as people do, or much of it is in the name of just keeping up with others. As we saw there, what he said in chapter 4 of Ecclesiastes. Things are bought more out of rivalry than out of necessity. Chapter 4, verse 4, I've seen that every labor and every skill which is done is the result of rivalry between a man and his neighbor. You ever had that situation? My neighbor got a new boat. Well, you know what? I've kind of decided now I need one. Dave Ramsey once said that we buy things that we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like. Because we're just trying to keep up with what everyone else is doing. Well, they've got it, and I can't let them get ahead of me. Solomon says that's vanity. That doesn't bring satisfaction. Gaining more things, laboring more to accomplish more, and to earn more, it never will satisfy. Money will never satisfy, as he says there in Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 10 that we read, he who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves abundance with its income. This too is vanity. Why? Because if you earn a certain amount of money, all of a sudden you think, this is going to make me happy, and when you get there, you want more. It turns out that wasn't the amount that would satisfy. It's some other amount that's bigger. There's always this elusive goal. If I could just have this, it would make me happy. It's vanity. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, beginning in verse 7, Paul said, we've brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. If we have food and covering, with these we shall be content. But those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare and many foolish and harmful desires, which plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil, and some, by longing for it, have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. The love of money creates all kinds of problems. Or Solomon said, it's vanity. It never satisfies. We never get enough. If that's what we're after, there's no fulfillment in that. Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, you can't serve God and money. You can't serve two masters. Eventually, they're going to come into conflict. You have to choose. Who are you going to serve? And Solomon wrote down for us, he tried it. He said, it's not there. It's not with wealth. It's not with trying to accomplish. It's not with all of this. That's vanity. It's striving after wind. You're not going to be satisfied with that. And Solomon goes through a number of things throughout Ecclesiastes that he's chased after. Maybe satisfaction, maybe fulfillment will be found in this. And he said, here's all that I tried and it didn't work. And so he goes a different direction. Maybe it's over here. No, it's not there. Maybe it's over here. No, it's not there. And he gets to the very end of the book in chapter 12, and he says, here's the conclusion. You want to know where satisfaction is? You want to know where fulfillment is? You want to know what's never going to let you down? What's always going to make life fulfilled? Here's the answer. The very end of the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon writes, verses 13 and 14. The conclusion when all has been heard is, fear God and keep His commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether good or evil. You want ultimate fulfillment, it's not found in money. You want ultimate fulfillment, it's not found in pleasure, it's not found in accomplishment, it's not found in earning, it's not found in just trying to amass more and more educations and accomplishments and credentials and things like that. That's vanity, it's not going to. You want fulfillment, serve God. You want fulfillment, line yourself up to follow His standards. You want fulfillment, love Him first, because He can completely satisfy. Nothing else can. Nothing else will. We look out at our world and we see that we're chasing after all kinds of things, and it seems like every few months there's some new fad that says, here's where it's at. And today they're saying, if you just change your gender, you'll be satisfied. You think about all of the pain that that's going to cause when so many who have tried the things that are being pushed come to realize that's causing more damage. It's causing harm rather than good. There is no satisfaction in the things that our world pushes. If you could just accomplish this in your career, if you could just earn more money, if you could just get your bank account to a certain size, you'll be satisfied. That's what our world pushes. And as Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun. He tried that very same thing. And he said it's vanity, it's striving after wind, it isn't there. But his conclusion, serve God, fear God, and keep His commandments. You want real satisfaction? Follow after Jesus Christ, the one who will never let you down, the one who can fill every need, the one who promises that as we seek God and His righteousness, as we seek the kingdom of God and His righteousness, every need we have will be filled. He'll take care of us. He can completely satisfy where nothing else can. Solomon wrote an entire book to make that one simple point. All of these things that the world says are great really aren't, but God is. In Philippians chapter 4, we see Paul writing something that we can see a similar lesson in. We know that Paul's motivation in everything was to please God, to bring more people to Christ. And because that was his purpose, he said in Philippians 4:12 and 13, he said, I know how to get along with humble means and also how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I've learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, of having abundance and suffering need. I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. Paul's motivation in everything was to please God, to do His will, and it got to the point he could be content in whatever situation, wherever God led him, because his satisfaction, his joy was found in God. When we seek God for our ultimate fulfillment, we can go wherever He'll send, do whatever He says, and find satisfaction and contentment. Because the only real fulfillment in this life, the only real fulfillment that there is for the needs we have, is in following after Jesus, conforming to the will of our Creator, fearing God and obeying Him. So we have to ask, what motivates me? What motivates us? What motivates you? What are you running after? What are you striving after? If I could just learn this one more thing, if I could just get this one more credential. Or is it about pleasure and fun? Is it about if I could just make my bank account get a little bit bigger? Life is so much more than the things that we have and the accomplishments that we've achieved. Or are you running after the Lord and motivated by keeping His word? Because you see, the only time that we'll find, the only place we'll find real satisfaction is when we're motivated by and running after our Lord with everything that we have, putting Him first. But does that describe you? If it doesn't, we invite you to make a change tonight. We invite you to put Him first, to make that decision that that's what you will do from here forward, starting tonight. If we can assist you in that, if you want to be united with Christ tonight and make Him your Lord through confessing your belief in Him, turning away from sin and being united with Him in the waters of baptism, you can do that very thing. We would be glad to assist you. Or tonight, if as a Christian you've turned away from Him, maybe you've been pursuing something else more than you're pursuing Him, He's the only thing, the only place you'll find true satisfaction, true fulfillment. We invite you to come back, to run after Him ahead of everything else. And if you need assistance in that, if we can pray with you, if we can pray for you, if we can help you in making that decision tonight, we invite you to come while we stand and sing.